Genetic testing in athletes have been introduced in the last, I would say, decade, and most of these genetic testing, unfortunately, are not being based on very strong science. So the science is very in its infancy in this regard. So what people are doing is they're looking at genetic markers, specific genetic markers across the human genome that are associated, for instance, with people that are running marathon in 2 hours, which are very unique people. Or looking at specific genetic markers for people that are running very fast. For instance, someone like Usain Bolts who runs less than 10 seconds, 100 meters. And these people are very unique, and we are looking for the genetic component of these people and how is this genetic component different from the general population. The problem is that we don't have enough of these people in the world, so the numbers are very small, and therefore the science is not very robust and not very clear. So we are far from being conclusive about which genes are associated with athletic performance.
And now over in China, they're testing some of their athletes. I read they're testing athletes ahead of the 2020 Winter Games.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
I think it's certainly not accurate at the moment. And I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is the selection of the athletes at a very young age, especially that they are choosing children, or they might choose children to a specific sport, which is we are not there at all.
How dangerous could this be?
I think the message is the most important thing. So it can be dangerous if the message is wrong, if the message is detrimental, if someone is telling you that you have a gene, for instance, that is predisposing you to a certain disease without any background or knowledge, that's dangerous.
Is WADA, World Anti-Doping Authority, going to have to change its direction to suit these developments?
Yeah, so I think WADA is an organization that is now trying to understand, as well as us, how genetic is going to influence the future of sports performance.
How close are we to, I suppose, designing athletes?
Wow, we are getting closer. We are getting very closer, and it's very concerning. I think with the new technology that has been introduced, my concern is that people will do that. People will do anything to win, but there is going to be a consequence to that.
Is it, in your personal opinion, an exciting time, or are we verging almost a terrifying time?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's exciting time because there is an opportunity today very cheaply to sequence the entire genomes. But when you get to athletic performance, it can also be terrifying because people can misuse that. The one interesting thing is that your genetic is actually not always your destiny. So you can actually manipulate your genetic via the environment. If you exercise and you eat well and you sleep well, you can change the expression of your genes.
More on that, we're joined by Victorian University sports scientist Sam Robertson. Sam, we're seeing the emergence of university and sports science partnerships, particularly in the AFL, and we've discussed it here before with the Western Bulldogs and Victorian University. How much has science and analytics emerged over the past few years? Tell us about the growth.
Well, the growth's been absolutely immense, I suppose, and there's been a couple of different reasons for that. First and foremost is this huge explosion, I suppose, of technology and the improvements we've seen in computing at the same time. And as a result of that, we're seeing, massive amounts of data that we've never seen before. And so we've had to respond to that in order to make use of it and improve our decision-making.
How much has it changed the operation of not only AFL clubs, Sam, but sport as a whole as well?
Well, I think sports science and sports performance in Australia has always been about improving the performance of athletes, of coaches, of administrators. But again, these growth areas of computing and data has meant fundamentally that we've needed to change the workforce a little bit. It's also meant that a lot of the things that were once upon a time confined to laboratories are now actually being able to be undertaken actually in the applied environments for athletes. So they're not needing to necessarily change their daily structure in order to take advantage of some of these new advancements, which is really exciting.
It is, isn't it? And look, if you look at last night's game, here we have the Tigers and the Magpies, a history of well over 100 years. When you look at the early 20th century when Collingwood dominated and they came back Richmond in 1980, then they flogged them last year in the preliminary final. So the point I'm trying to make is you've got this tribalism, and then you've got all these moves within sports science. Is it a happy marriage, the way they sit side by side?
It is in many respects, but again, we're in an interesting time in Australian sport in particular, because obviously there's a certain amount of money that can go around in a typical sporting environment or a sporting organisation. And so historically, that money hasn't been spent on sports science. It hasn't been spent on sports analytics. And again, the majority of the football codes in Australia in particular, professional football codes, have a salary cap for their football department spend as well as for their athletes. So at the moment, we're probably at a stage of where we're trying to find a happy medium with respect to how much money and how much resources do we spend on analytics, on sports science, as opposed to the more traditional areas like medical or coaching in particular. And so that's something we're really going through at the moment, I think.
Sam, where does Australia rank in terms of analytics on the world stage?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, we've always been well known and well regarded in the world stage with respect to sports science, sports performance. I think probably countries such as the United States are well known for leading the way in the analytics sense. The Moneyball story is now about 20 years old, and most people, even not involved in sport, are familiar with that, as the book and the movie. So we're really playing a little bit of catch-up with respect to the United States in that respect, and even that's reflected in our workforce in Australia. We've got a lot of international people working in that space. So it's really incumbent on us as a sector, and also the university sector, I think, to train and develop a new breed of sports scientists, one that's very comfortable with sports analytics. And again, we've probably dropped the ball a little bit on that, and that's something we need to look forward to in the next 10 years about readjusting what the workforce looks like.
Look, as a father of three, I'm not going to push my kids down any sporting channel, but I love the fact that they play sport, they're interested in sport. I want to ask you the question, the positives, the upbeat, the good news story about sports science and what it can do, not only to our children emerging as sports people, but through their own lives.
Well, fundamentally, that we should see an increase in the diversity and the volume of jobs in sports science. But again, you've touched on a really relevant point at this stage of where we're at in the development of sports science. It's worth pointing out that it's a really young discipline compared to other scientific disciplines. You know, we're talking 50 or 60 years old here rather than hundreds of years old. But it's certainly incumbent on sports science to think more broadly rather than just at the pointy end of developing the best elite athletes, and also filtering that down into newer markets, into women's sport, into disability sport, into community sport, for example. And also ensuring that when we create a new initiative or a new development that brings the industry forward, it's felt by the broader society as well. So sport for social change is something that's incredibly important, and I think there's certainly some really strong leaders in that area internationally, FC Barcelona, for example. And so it's important that we continue to, well, in particular in Australia, we continue to see the benefits from new initiatives, not just at the elite end of sport, but also in that broader society, including fans.
Yeah, and it's a good news story, that. It really is. And it is a young discipline, as you mentioned, but as we grow and we get better at it, it can help, I think, at all levels for the young and the very old. But look, this is a question completely without notice. But Julie's come in here this morning or today and started talking about infrared saunas and how, look, I've got a bit of a dodgy neck, right? And she is a walking advertisement for the benefits of infrared saunas. You got anything on that subject?
Tell me there's a benefit, Sam. Tell me there's a benefit.
Well, fortunately, that's well and truly out of my area of expertise, so I'm not going to confirm or deny that one.
Oh, beautiful.
But there's plenty of those types of initiatives going on around the place at the moment. It's a full-time job in and of itself to sort the the beneficial scientific initiatives from the noise, so to speak.
A simple yes would have done the trick, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us. It was lovely to talk to you, and thank you also for your time when we were in Melbourne recently. It was great to catch up.